Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Joey Coleman helps companies keep their customers and employees. As an award-winning speaker, he shares his first 100 days methodology for improving customer and employee retention with organisations around the world, with companies like Whirlpool, Volkswagen Australia, and Zappos. His two books have received critical acclaim, and both were instant Wall Street Journal bestsellers. Never Lose a Customer Again shows how to turn any sale into a lifelong customer, and his newest book, Never Lose an Employee Again, details a framework companies around the world can use to reduce turnover and increase employee engagement. Joey, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, Brad, thanks so much for having me. I so appreciate the kind invitation. And thanks to everybody who's listening in or watching. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
What I probably should have put in the pre-text there, of all of the speakers I've seen over all of the years, Joey was, if I think about one word, it's energy. Joey is a very energetic and passionate person. So I think you're going to enjoy our conversation today. Joey, so we spoke before the recording, and I was commenting. You come across to me as someone who's whip smart, first of all. Second, really quite in tune emotionally, and maybe that's why you landed in this space. But also just a darn nice guy. Now it seems I've got this great massive disconnect that I just can't leave unless leave for us to move on to the conversation unless I touch, which is being such a nice chap. You're also have a background as a lawyer, which they just don't seem to connect very well.
I love it, Brad. I love it. Well, you're very kind and very flattering. I appreciate that.
Just tell us a bit about how you got to be writing about the first 100 days for customers, employees, and like living a full-on life in that arena.
Yeah, so the good news for anybody who's not a fan of lawyers or attorneys is I'm a recovering attorney at this point. So the first steps have been you have a problem. There's 11 steps after that. It totally works itself out. But yeah, my career has been incredibly eclectic. I studied government and international relations in undergrad. I went to law school where I studied national security law, international law and litigation. I worked in the White House. I worked in the United States Secret Service. I worked in the Central Intelligence Agency. I was a criminal defense lawyer. I worked in business consulting. I taught at the postgraduate level. I ran an ad agency for over 15 years. But the thread that ties all these things together, and to answer your question of how did I come to be somebody who spends all day thinking about, talking about, and helping companies with customer and employee experience, is that the way you succeeded in any of those roles was to have a keen understanding of the human condition. Yeah. Why do people do the things they do? And what can we do to convince, persuade, encourage them to do the things we'd like them to do? And what I've done is I've taken my formal education and my practical, experience on the street, so to speak, and tried to combine those into frameworks and stories and methodologies that help business leaders understand their customers more and understand their employees more. Because at the end of the day, and I know our conversation is going to focus more on customers today than employees, but customers are humans, and humans are humans are humans, and employees are humans. And humans are humans are humans. And while there are certainly differences in how we approach the world as humans, there are some really fundamental underlying principles about the human condition that once you start to understand, makes interacting with humans exponentially easier.
It does. That's a great response. I heard it once said that a company is just people doing stuff, and it's a really simple way to boil it down. In the first book that I wrote called Made to Thrive, I have a balance like a seesaw or a teeter-totter. And on one side is the customer and on the other side is the employee. And the job of leadership is to get that to be in balance so that the employees are gaining value, that we're equally living the company's purpose in the center, which is the fulcrum, and then we're delivering the right kind of value to the customers. And on both fronts, it's about retention, which is really what you're talking about beyond the first 100 days in the methodology, either for customers or employees, if I'm not mistaken.
100%, Brad. And I think what is fascinating is how many companies focus on either acquisition of customers or recruiting of employees. And the amount of time, effort, attention, money that is spent on those activities comparatively to the amount of time, effort, energy, money that is spent on keeping those people engaged and keeping them retained is shockingly disparate. Like if you ask almost any business leader, how much money did you spend on marketing last year? They can tell you pretty accurately.
Yeah.
If you ask them how much money did you spend on keeping your customers last year, they're like, well, I'm not sure I understand the question. And I'm like, well, the question's actually rather easy. I'm not understanding why you don't know the number. And the same thing holds true for employees. People can describe their recruiting process to a T. Well, we require them to submit this, and these are the requirements, and this much years of education, and this many credentials, and these certificates, and these references, blah, blah, blah. And then we say, okay, well, why do people stay?
Yeah.
Well, it kind of depends. Well, does it? Because we had all this specificity at the front, and yet we get real wishy-washy on the back end. Yeah. And I think there are a number of reasons for that, but I think that's why so many businesses struggle.
It's so easy to measure, certainly in terms of customer lifetime value as well, even at an average, right? Even at an average, maybe not down to the cent, it might be not as easy, but it's so easy to measure, A, and then B, it's so staggering. So in my experience, customer onboarding is a process that very few companies do well. In your experience, how would you describe the average customer onboarding that you've come across, because you've lived for quite a few years in this space? So what's the average customer onboarding that you've come across? And please share what you've learned about customer attrition in the first 100 days.
Well, I would describe the average customer onboarding program as being unintentional. There's no strategy behind it. There's no process. It's like we call it onboarding because it's the first things that happen, but nobody has really sat down and given it the same attention and focus and dedication that we've given, for example, to our marketing and sales initiatives. You know, we would find it laughable to send a salesperson to meet with a prospective customer without arming them with proper documentation, the information they need to know, pricing, product descriptions, all the things that they're going to need to do to convince someone to invest their hard-earned time, money, and decide to transition from being a prospect to a customer. Yet that same level of focus and emphasis and intentionality doesn't seem to go to the account managers or the onboarding process or getting someone up to speed. And so there's a fundamental disconnect between those two. And the research bears this out as well, Brad. The research shows globally, when I was writing Never Lose a Customer Again, we looked at small, medium, and large businesses, online and offline, domestic and international, folks that sold products, folks that sold services, folks that sold product and services. And the research coalesced around the following shocking finding. And that is that regardless of industry, regardless of how long you've been in business, regardless of what part of the world you operate in, somewhere between 20 and 70% of your new customers will decide to quit doing business with you before the 100-day anniversary. 20 to 70%. People are running out the back door as quickly as you're bringing them in the front door. And what was more shocking to me, Brad, than that statistic was that the typical business leader had no idea what their percentage was.
Yeah.
They had no idea how many customers they were losing. They had no idea why they were losing them. But most importantly, they didn't have an understanding of how quickly they were losing them in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you give us a couple of examples? I seem to remember there was one or two examples in the book of industry specific.
Oh yeah, happy to. I mean, we looked at dozens and dozens of industries, but just to give you some context, the average in software as a service is 20%. Cell phone companies is 28%. Banks is 32%. Auto mechanics is 68%. Restaurants is 40 to 70%, depending on your cuisine. I mean, these numbers are absolutely enormous. And to be clear, these are the number of people who try your product or service, and before they reach the 100-day anniversary of first becoming a customer, first giving it a try, they have decided not to do business with you anymore. Now, there may be some people listening, Brad, that are like, but Joey, you don't understand. In our business, we sign year-long contracts. There's no way they can get out before the 100-day anniversary. They have to stay in for at least a year.
Yeah.
I understand. But the research actually shows that their decision of whether they will renew at day 365 is not made on day 364. It is made in the first 100 days. So this time period is worthy of our attention and our effort.
Yeah, love it. Love it. What's the difference between customer service and customer experience? Because they sound like they're pretty similar words, but I've heard you describe that in a very specific and different way that I found to be quite interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Brad. And I understand, as somebody who's been in this space for a long time, why so many people and so many organizations use those words interchangeably. Because you're right, they do sound very similar. But I think there's a distinct difference between the two. See, I define customer service as the assistance or the advice that an organization is providing to the people who buy or use its products or service. In other words, the reactive help when something isn't working or you're not sure how to use it. How can we help you to be able to get more value out of what you paid for?
Yeah.
Whereas customer experience is how your customers perceive the interactions they have with your company. It's not just the, are you helping me when I need it? It's, did you think enough to anticipate my needs before I asked? Did you design this product or this service to be understandable, to be consistent, to be relevant, to be anticipatory, to do the types of things that as a customer or a consumer, I'm hoping that it does? Have you done your best to manage the emotional experience I have with your product or service? What's the feeling? So in many ways, customer experience is a much more proactive as opposed to reactive behavior. And I think of it as the customer experience is the umbrella under which customer service has a space, right? So customer experience, the big umbrella. Customer service is a component of the customer experience, but it's not the end-all be-all.
So the way that we look at functions and roles within a business is we think about what's the output. So what for customer experience, what's the output? Or put another way, what would a great customer experience person, role, function do? What would be the significant impact that you would see? Would it be retention, or what would be, do you think would be the impact?
Well, retention is certainly a great metric to track and a great data point to look at. But the way I would probably answer that is there are some people in your company that are responsible for customer service. Everyone in your company is responsible for customer experience. Yeah. Everyone deals with the experience. And so the way I would track that is, does everybody in my company know that? Does everybody in my company live that? And is everybody in my company committed to that higher goal and ideal? And how does that show up in their day-to-day interactions? With each other, with the customers, with the design of the products they make, with the way we position them, all the key elements of our business. What is the feeling of those things?
Yeah. Net promoter score is something that you speak about through your work, and it's great. And I think that everyone who I guess is familiar with NPS knows that it's great. It was very popular 10 years ago, and one of the challenges with NPS is that it can get hacked. Let's just say, and it can make it
often does
and often does. Right now, yeah. I know that Fred Reichheld came up with NPS3 now, which is
Yes.
connected to the financial longevity of a customer. A bit harder to calculate, obviously, than give me a score from 1 to 10. What's your kind of take on NPS, the use of it, and how it connects with what you've just spoken about on customer experience?
I'm definitely a fan of Fred Reichheld, and he has certainly made his mark in the customer experience, customer service world. And I think NPS marked a sea change in how organizations thought about tracking the experience their people have, and not only asking them the question, but then using the answers to drive business decisions. The challenge I have with it, as you alluded to, Brad, is how easily it's hacked. And by hacked, I mean the customer now understands the game.
Yeah.
They understand when you say on a scale of 1 to 10 that if I give you a 7, that's bad. If I give you a 6, it's horrible. And they've become so numb to the questions that are being asked that I don't know that we're getting the type of data and the type of insight that we were getting in the beginning. Additionally, while I appreciate the quantitative element of give me a number score, we miss out on the more subjective, qualitative discussion of why did you give me this score? Was it because the last person that presented the bill was obnoxious, but all the service before that was great? Is it because it took me 10 times to get an appointment before I could find? There's so many pieces at play that when we ask someone, hey, would you be willing to promote me to a friend or a family member? The intention behind the question is great, but if we don't understand why they gave us the number they gave us, it doesn't give a whole lot for us to work with that we know is directly tied to the experience customers are having.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the first 100 days of customer experience. When we get that right, when companies do a good job of that, what actually happens? Because we've alluded to that, but what do you see happen, or what things would customers expect to happen to things like lifetime customer value, customer retention, and company profits?
Let's look at absolutely.
The
Let's look at the research. So the research shows that 20 to 70% leave in the first 100 days. We already talked about that. If on day 101, a customer is feeling ecstatic about the relationship, they are loving it, they are feeling bought in, they're feeling connected, in the typical business, that customer will stay a customer for 5 years. Okay? Yeah. So if we look at those two data points, and let's be candid, everyone listening into our conversation, everybody watching along, hopefully you have a feel for what your lifetime value of your customer is. If you don't, that's a math assignment worth doing. But we should know the difference between keeping a customer for 3 months, what revenue that produces and what profits that produces, and keeping a customer for 5 years, what revenue produces and what profits that produces. That's a math homework assignment for you to do on your own time, but I can tell you, the longer you keep them, the more money you make. That I know to be true. So this is going to be in your best interest financially.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say is it's worth a brief historical analysis of when lifetime value of a customer first really started to appear in common parlance. And it really started to happen as a result of the venture capitalist operating in Silicon Valley. Because here's what they figured out. They figured out that when looking at SaaS companies and churn rates on a monthly basis, that they could extrapolate out growth over time and put a valuation on lifetime value of the customer, but across the entire enterprise, matched with their growth and customer acquisition rate, that would give them a valuation idea of what an exit would look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
They then brought this analysis forward to startup companies and companies early in the life cycle, year one, first 6 months. And they would use this as a valuation tool for deciding how much money they would put behind the program. And when in doubt, I believe it's okay to pay attention to where the VCs are putting their money. Because often They are making smart bets. Now, I know everyone's familiar with the idea of, oh, well, they're betting on 10 things and only 2 are going to work. Well, that's actually not the reality. 2 are going to be stratospheric home runs.
Yeah.
About 5 are going to work. And about 2 or 3 are not going to work. So stop and think of, they're making 10 bets, but they're seeing 100 or 1,000 deals to make those 10 bets. They're looking at a more global worldview of what the marketplace is. So I do think seeing how churn relates to lifetime value, relates to valuation, can give us a real financial understanding. Because a lot of people, Brad, and I imagine you have a similar experience, when they first hear my work, they're like, oh, Joey, you're just the lovey-dovey, take care of the customer guy, take care of the employee, and everyone will be happy and sing kumbaya. Yes, if that motivates your worldview and your approach and your philosophy, we're going to get along fabulously. But if you're more of a spreadsheet person, more of a what's the bottom line bean counter person, this philosophy works as well, because it results in increased profits, increased retention, increased engagement.
And it's, in my experience, focusing on lifetime customer value, lifetime value of a customer, what it can do is it can help us to achieve our revenue targets or the goals that we set in 3 years' time specifically, because we can analyze where is it now and where does it need to be, and then that can be one of the multiple things that we're doing to achieve those goals over time. So
100%. It also helps us to avoid cutting off our nose to spite our face, right? Which happens a lot in business. We start working with someone and we're like, oh, I'm not going to like this. Never mind. Pff, you're not the fit for me. And we miss the point that if we just worked a little bit harder to get things set up, to get them using our product or service, to get them comfortable, we could move them to more of an autopilot relationship that required less attention, focus, and customization, that would produce that recurring revenue that every business I've ever met is desiring. It's like we could get to that point if we fully understood our numbers. And the fact of the matter is, most organizations don't understand their numbers.
And it's not that hard. Now, before I ask you to share the 8 phases of customer experience, given what we've just discussed, when people say to you, Joey, it seems too good to be true, and I bet that you've heard that before.
Just once or twice.
Yeah, because I reckon that when I saw you pre-COVID in the US speak and present to us over a half a day, I think it was, there were people then who were saying it seems too good to be true. So how do you reply to that? Like, what's your genuine reply to that comment?
Yeah, so let's reply as a recovering lawyer, and then I'll try to reply as a human. Okay, so first, as a recovering lawyer, I did the research. The book has 16 pages of footnotes. Go check my research. Go check my sources. I put them all in there. They're downloadable for a reason. I didn't base this just on Joey's beliefs, Joey's feelings, Joey's ideas. I based this on decades of research and studies globally that have proven this time and time again across industries. So I understand you may doubt me, but if you want to doubt all of my footnotes and all of my endnote sources as well, well, then I'm sorry, we're just never going to be able to see eye to eye, right? Now let me respond as a human, as opposed to a lawyer saying, cite my evidence. I understand that it sounds too good to be true. And I understand that it sounds foreign, because in most businesses globally today, our desire for scale, our desire for more, our desire for bigger this quarter than last quarter has created a myopic view that is over-indexing on acquisition instead of retention. It's also the case that as human beings, we are built for new instead of familiar.
Yeah.
Okay? There's a reason why the divorce rate is greater than 50%. The reason why is long-term relationships have always required effort, work, and focus. They don't come naturally. So I respect and understand that someone look at this might say, well, Joey, that doesn't sound as fun or as sexy or as interesting, or, ooh, it's not a shiny object that I can go chase after. I get it. We have to work against our base human biology and instinct if we want long-term sustainability, success, and opportunity. But I recognize that I'm asking you to combat your biology and your humanity when I ask you to believe these things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You and I spoke about the book that I'm working on at the moment called Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. One of the key principles in there, which you really just kind of covered in a way, is one of the problems we work with entrepreneurs, right, and owner-led companies. One of the problems is impatience and undiscipline, right? So we got this 2x2 and it's impatient and undisciplined. Right. And that is the job that we've got to do, is, like you just said, to overcome our natural human desires that in entrepreneurs are kind of turbocharged. And I love it's me and I love it, but it's really the job to be done. So thank you, Joey.
Oh, my pleasure. And Brad, if I may add on, because we hadn't talked about that 2x2 of impatient and undisciplined. I'm sure this is a layer that you've already identified, but for folks who might be getting introduced to this for the first time and haven't thought about it, to add on another layer, most entrepreneurs, the way they got to the success they are currently at is from impatient, undisciplined behavior.
100%.
They said, this system is broken. I'm not willing to accept this anymore. I'm going to be undisciplined and I'm going to break the rules even more and create something different. And I'm going to do it tomorrow because I'm so sick of this. So all the things they've been rewarded for in their career to date has been in the squares of undisciplined and impatient. But that will only get you so far. And that is also not sustainable. What happens is that continued behavior turns into self-sabotage, turns into destruction, turns into not being able to keep a team, not being able to keep customers, not being able to keep focus. Where we have the opportunity to elevate to the next level is to say, what happens with some structure? What happens with some discipline? What happens with some focus? What happens with some patience? The problem is the person who founds the company is often not the person who's hardwired to run the company at the next level. And I think if we would quit demonizing this idea that you need to start and found a company and run it forever, and instead say, hey, there are startup CEOs, there are mid-range CEOs, there are legacy CEOs, and guess what? They're all awesome. And they're all valuable, and they're all interesting. Instead of having this entrepreneurial judgment of, oh, you exited too early, should have hung on to it, or, oh, you hung on way long beyond. The problem is the few that we point to, we think that they're exceptions to the rule without acknowledging that, yes, you know, Mark Zuckerberg is still running Facebook, or yes, Elon Musk is still running Tesla. But we miss the point that as they started to grow, a gigantic force came underneath that provided discipline and patience. It's not that those folks necessarily became more disciplined and patient, although I would posit some of them, at least as an outsider, not knowing either of them personally or some of the other leaders, they probably did experience some increased discipline and increased patience. But what I know for a fact is the leaders in the rung underneath them are built that way. This is what we've seen with Apple, right? This is the transition from Steve Jobs, right? The visionary, undisciplined, impatient, while Apple is still growing, right? Apple is still doing well under, the new CEO, or not new anymore. It's been a decade plus now at this point, but it's a completely different philosophy on how the scaling accelerates from there.
I love that you're always looking for affirmation of your own work, right? And I love that it sparked something in you. So that's the first time I've shared it in the public domain. Okay.
Oh, I love it. So, I'm honored that it came up in the conversation, and I hope it was okay that I grabbed onto that thread and pulled on it.
Of course. So we call people who are the people in the 2x2 impulsive risk takers, impatient and undisciplined, and that's where most entrepreneurs live. For clarity, the work that we do, our if they so desire, to your point, is to take them to become a strategic executor. So that's the context, something where they can understand this strategy and they can confidently execute it. But Yeah, like yourself, it's something that's been years and years and years in the observation to get to the point where it doesn't need to be like this, because if you're an impulsive risk taker, you end up with a life that is not really what you kind of signed up for.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. I think leaders would benefit from getting comfortable with who they are and stop trying to be someone who they're not.
Yeah.
If you are the undisciplined risk taker and that's your mojo and that's how you work, it's okay to keep doing that. It's not okay to keep doing that and think you're going to get different results, right?
Yeah.
But it's okay to keep doing that and to maybe move to an emeritus status or start to run the skunk works and bring someone else in to run your company that you founded or something like that. Those are all acceptable options. What's not acceptable is thinking that continuing to do the same thing is going to produce the results you actually desire, because it's just not.
Yeah. And, that's part of the job and the work, to figure out what do you want from your life. But let's take a step back, because what I want to cover off still today is the 8 phases of customer experience and the tools that customers can use. So let's start with these 8 phases of customer experience. Now, I am very, very, very critical of people who create acronyms, which, like, there was one person I remember, and they had their core values. This is the put my arm around you and punch you in the guts at the same time. There was one person who had their core values, and they spelled out recipe, right? And they said, well, we want it because we're a cooking company, so we want it to spell out recipe. And it's like, but it's not really what you value, right? But the way that you've gone about it, the way that you have structured these 8 phases, I have great respect for, because the intent is so kind of pure behind that. So tell us, if you can, about the 8 phases of customer experience and perhaps a couple of examples.
Brad, I appreciate that so much. Yeah, so the 8 phases, just for context before we dive into them, and I'll go through in kind of a speedy fashion, and then we can dive deep into whichever ones you want to explore. They all start with the letter A. And that is not to confuse anyone, but rather to say that you've got to get each of these phases right. And if you get them all right, it's like getting straight A's on a report card from your customers. They're loving everything you're doing at every step along the way. The first phase is the assess phase. This is when a prospective customer is considering whether or not they want to do business with you. They're checking out your marketing materials. They're going through your sales process. They're getting a feel for what would it be like to actually be a customer. We then come to phase 2, the admit phase. In the admit phase, a prospect admits that they have a need or a problem or a desire that they believe you can help them with. They sign on the dotted line. They hand over their hard-earned cash. They transition from being a prospect to being a customer. Almost immediately after that happens, they go to phase 3, the affirm phase. Now, the affirm phase in more common parlance is known as buyer's remorse. When the customer begins to doubt the decision they just made to buy your product or sign up for your service. Now, the crazy thing here, Brad, is most organizations are familiar with the phrase buyer's remorse, but they have nothing in their system or process that is designed to address the buyer's remorse that they scientifically know every customer will experience. In the affirm phase, we want to affirm the choice. We want to remind the customer why they made the decision. We want to remind them that the decision they made was a wise decision. And we want to affirm our energetic excitement for the chance to serve them and to have them as a customer. We then come to phase 4, the activate phase. Now, the activate phase is the first real moment of truth. In a product setting, it's when they actually get the product and they start to use it. In a service setting, it might be a kickoff meeting. It might be the first time we perform the service. Depends, again, on your industry. But what happens in the activate phase is we need to energize the relationship. We need to let that brand new customer know that doing business with us is going to be unlike any business experience they've ever had before. Now, here, when we move into stage 5, is when things get really messy. We call this the acclimate phase, and this is another place where organizations have a tendency to fall apart. See, you've done this hundreds of times, thousands of times, tens of thousands of times. But to a brand new customer who's never done business with you, they have no idea how your product works. They have no idea how your service works. They have no idea what to expect. They have no idea about your cadence of communication. They have no idea who to ask if there's a problem. They have no idea how to actually use the things they just bought. We need to hold our customers' hands. We need to acclimate them to our way of operating, to how our products work, to how our services perform. We've got to hold their hand. Now, the acclimate phase can last for weeks or even months. The problem is most organizations give it hours, or maybe if we're lucky, days of attention, but they don't hold the customer's hand as they completely navigate this phase. If you do hold the customer's hand and you help them acclimate, you have the opportunity to bring them to stage 6, the accomplish phase. In the accomplish phase, the customer achieves the goal they had when they originally decided to become a customer. Way back when they were a prospect, they had a vision of what having your product or having your service was going to allow them to feel, achieve, be, how they were going to see themselves, any number of criteria that they might have had. If you're not sure what they were hoping to accomplish, and if you don't track their progress towards that accomplishment, and if you don't celebrate with them when they accomplish, they're going to have forgotten, they're not going to be paying attention, and they sure as heck aren't going to celebrate.
Yeah.
If and only if they accomplish the goal they originally had do we have the right, the privilege, the opportunity to invite them to phase 7, the adopt phase. Now, in the adopt phase, a customer becomes loyal to us and only us. They're committed. They're not going to go check out the competitor. If we create it, they want it. They are bought in. And if and only if someone's become an adopter, do we have the opportunity to have them elevated to the final phase, nirvana, the holy grail, the 8th phase, the advocate phase, where they become a raving fan, publicly and privately singing our praises to everyone they know, referring new business, writing testimonials, doing unsolicited posts on social media. These are the customers that every business claims to want to have. And yet, they do 2 things. Number 1, they try to jump someone from the sale to the advocate stage almost immediately without any consideration for the 6 intervening stages in between. And number 2, when someone does advocate, we don't reward it. We don't acknowledge it. We don't even thank them. We're just like, oh, there we go. I guess we got another customer. We got some new business. There is a huge opportunity in every organization to look at these 8 phases and give an honest review about what are we currently doing, how is it working, and how could we be doing it better to provide the kind of experience to our customers that would help them go from phase to phase to phase. Because pro tip here for all of you that got those 8 phases and are like, oh, okay, interesting, Joey, I see it. Every time you roll out a new product, every time you announce a new service, all of the people that are in the adopt advocate phase that you've worked so hard to create, go back to phase 1, the assess phase. I normally present these 8 phases in a circle, and they're in a circle for a reason, because the continued relationship with the customer keeps revolving around. Now, they'll move through the circle faster next time, we hope, but we still need to be paying attention to where they are in the journey with every new product, with every new service, with every new year of service.
Yeah. Okay, there's a lot in there, and I love it, and it's exactly what I wanted you to do. Can you give us an example of each? Because I know you've got a plethora. So starting at phase 1, can you give us an example, either B2B or B2C, starting at phase 1 of what would that look like? And I know it means going through a little bit again, but if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to get through as many of these as we can in as quickly as fashion as we can. First of all, if I may, and I totally appreciate the understanding of the B2B or the B2C distinction, I personally believe that it's all H to H. It's human to human.
Yeah.
And I think way too many organizations get caught up in the, well, Joey, you don't understand. We're B2B. There's an H buying your product or service. There's a human there.
And how does that, Joey, how does that, that's really important. So we work with a whole range of industries, from mining to blockchain to retailers to manufacturers. But I think about retail because the mindset of many retailers is one of the whole population, and we put an offer out there, and then a blank-faced stranger walks in and transacts and then leaves. So I love the H2H. Tell us about retail. How do you contextualize that?
Yeah, so in a retail setting, let's talk about why they're a blind-faced customer coming in. Are we doing targeted advertising? Are we connecting our advertising to the purchase? When someone does make a purchase, are we trying to make it personally and emotionally connective? Or are we just saying, hey, thanks so much? When they actually leave the store with the product they purchase, is there any feedback loop? Is there anything on the tag or our conversation with them that says, hey, let's give you an example. Let's talk about this. What about somebody who buys a wedding dress?
Yeah.
Okay? They buy a wedding dress. They come to a retail establishment. Oh, there's some wedding dresses. They buy the dress they're going to wear. How does this relate to the phases? Well, the phase that I think is most interesting to explore on this is the accomplish phase. Because if you ask the typical male or the typical person who's not going to wear a wedding dress, they think the accomplish phase is when the person puts on the wedding dress and walks down the aisle at their wedding. That's what they were trying to accomplish. Respectfully, that's not what they were trying to accomplish. And anybody listening in who's ever worn a wedding dress probably knows what they were actually trying to accomplish, which is, when I see the photos of my wedding day, do I like the way I looked in the dress?
Yeah.
Now, the gap of when you get the photos to when you said I do, depending on the photographer you hired, now in this age of digital, it's faster, but you're probably a good 30 days out, maybe 60 days out, depending. Yeah. We need to know what the accomplished date is. So in a retail setting, somebody comes in, I've got a clothing store, and somebody comes in buying a shirt. And somebody, oh, that's a fantastic shirt. What are you buying it for? I've actually got a big date this weekend. I'm kind of excited. Awesome. If you don't mind my asking, would you be willing to text us a photo of how you look in that shirt after your big date? Because I'm sure you're going to look fabulous. Now, in some settings, like at a shopping mall, that might feel weird and awkward. But a boutique, high-end place where you shop regularly, that could feel very normal. What are we doing to kind of create these personal connections on an individualized basis, which obviously can spin us into huge conversations about scale, right? And how do we do it at scale? But what I will say is this about scale. Two thoughts. Number one, there are many, many businesses that worry about, well, how will I do it at scale before they really need to be having that worry. I was talking to some folks earlier today that have, their high-end coaching businesses that have maybe 10, 20 clients. And they're like, yeah, but Joey, how will I do it when I have 1,000? I'm like, well, we'll figure that out then. But right now you have 10. You can do something personal. Now, some of these folks are like, well, Joey, we've got a retail establishment. We've got all kinds of customers. Really? How many people actually buy in your store every day? Yeah. Well, it's actually not thousands. It's probably, 30 or 40. Okay, well, now we're having a different level of conversation. So let's not worry about scaling issues until we've actually grown to the scale where we start to break our personal connection moments.
Yeah. I think what would be easier or better is how people can use the 6 tools to enhance the customer journey, because it's really the 6 tools that will reinforce those points. So marrying together examples of the customer experience and how people use those tools, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So tool number 1, so let's give a quick overview of the 6 tools, and then I'll give an example of each, okay? Tool number 1, in-person interactions. The old-fashioned mano-a-mano, when you're actually in the same room as the person, talking to them, interacting with them. Number 2, email, okay? Number 3, physical mail, snail mail, sending something in the post. Number 4, phone, which includes phone calls and text messages. Number 5, videos. And number 6, gifts and presents. I'll tell a quick story that combines in-person and gift and present with the assess phase. I tell this one in my book, okay? There's a company called The Wealth Factory. They help entrepreneurs keep their money. Entrepreneurs really good at making money, not so good at keeping money. So they advise them with tax strategies, investment portfolios, risk profiling, all the things that a good entrepreneur is going to have in place to be able to maximize the amount of money that they can keep. The way they do this is they gather new prospective customers at their offices for a 3-day workshop. You bring in your financials, you go through everything, and at the end of the 3 days, they present like, here's what we would do for you, and you have an option to sign up for their program. Now, a few years ago, this is pre-COVID, I went to one of their events. I showed up for the event, and the CEO comes up to me about 10 minutes before the event starts, and he's like, hey, Joey, we're so excited to have you here. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. He's like, I've got a little gift for you. So I'm there in person. This is an in-person interaction, and he has a gift for me. So this is 2 of the tools being used in a single interaction. And he's like, here's the gift. And it's a 6-pack of root beer. Now, if you know me and know me well, I drink 2 things, water and root beer. I know I'm weird like that, but friends, this far into the podcast, you've already figured out that I'm a little strange, all right? This is not a reveal for anyone listening. I was blown away. I was like, how did you know I like root beer? He's like, oh, a little birdie told us. I said, no, seriously, how did you know? He said, Joey, our job is to know your hopes, your fears, your dreams, what you want to use this money for, the legacy you want to live, the investment you want to make, the toys you want to have, the money you want to spend on your family on vacations. And in our research, we imagined that a life with even more root beer would probably be a life you'd be excited about. I was like, oh my gosh, they know me. This is fabulous. Where do I sign up? He's like, Joey, we haven't even started the workshop. It's a 3-day workshop. I said, look, if this is an accurate preview of what it's like to be a customer, I'm all in. So in the assess phase, you want to give someone a preview of what the experience of being a valued, long-term, trusted customer is, because that will help them to imagine the benefit of becoming a customer.
Yes.
So that's in-person and gifts and presents. Let's talk about another company, and we'll do email and video as a combo. Okay? There's a company called Zappos. Zappos makes gym wipes. Have you ever been to the gym or the workout facility where you've seen the residue of the human who worked out before you on the bench?
Oh, yeah.
Gym wipes are an environmentally friendly antiseptic solution. You pull a wipe off the wall, you wipe down the bench so there isn't an involuntary DNA transfer, okay? Now, they sell their product in a B2B setting to health clubs and spas and gyms all around the world. They're an e-commerce company. So when you go on their website and you make your first purchase, you get a confirmation email. Now, many online e-commerce businesses send a confirmation email. This is nothing shocking. But what is shocking is the content of that email. When you open the email, you see a message at the top that says, "Thank you, Brad," or whatever your name is, with an exclamation point. You're like, oh my gosh, this is just for me. And it's bold and it's there and it's beautifully designed. It's not just a text email. Then underneath, there's an image of a Zappos employee holding a clipboard with your name on it. It says, "Thank you, Brad." And by the way, this is pre-AI, that they still do this manually one at a time. And a button underneath that encourages you to start watching. When you click the button Start Watching, a video launches, and the video is a customized video for you saying, "Hey, Brad, thanks so much for your wipe and dispenser order today. We think you're really going to love it. I hope you're going to find it to be really valuable in your gym in North Carolina where you're going to put it in place. I think it's going to be fantastic for your customers. We're super excited to have you as a customer. Let us know how it goes, and if there's anything more we can do to serve you. Thanks again for being a customer. We look forward to serving you in the weeks and months and years to come."
From a human.
From a human. From an actual human that used your name, that talked about your location. So it's very clear that this was made for you.
Yeah.
Personally. I don't know how many people listening in pay attention to email confirmation open rates. You're not weird like me, right? But in most industries, in e-commerce, the email confirmation email open rate hovers somewhere between 4 and 8%.
Yep.
The email from Zappos gets opened. The Start Watching button gets clicked, and the video gets watched in completion to the end of the video 78% of the time. Now, I don't know about you, Brad, but the idea that a brand new customer would listen to a customized video that I created for them in mere minutes after making their first purchase is a great way to start to address that affirm stage where they're doubting the decision they just made, when we know scientifically they're having that buyer's remorse for the purchase they just made. I'm able to jump in and address it instantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
None of this stuff is rocket science, but it does take focus and it does take intentionality. Let's look at phone. Okay, and we'll go with a bigger brand because we've given some smaller company examples. Let's go with a bigger brand. I fly a lot. I'm on Delta Airlines. That's my preferred airline of choice. Delta has this amazing thing that when you use the Delta app, they scan your luggage. And then as a frequent flyer with Delta, I get updates about where my luggage is. So I'll get on the plane. I'll be sitting on the plane, getting my seatbelt on, getting situated, putting things down, and my phone will alert. And it'll say, Joey, your bag has been loaded onto your flight to San Francisco. And I say, whew, we're going to be good. I breathe a little sigh of attention. Now, let's be candid.
I thought you were going to say, oh, no, I'm going to Dallas.
Yeah, exactly. Now, here's the thing. The amount of technology that is required to set that up and make that happen is a substantial investment, right? This is not something that a mom and pop retail store with one location and 3 employees is going to do. But the bigger you are, the bigger opportunity you have to bring your resources to bear to create these magical little moments like Delta does with me every time I fly. And let me tell you, Brad, if I've got a tight connection and I've got a checked bag, now I usually don't have a checked bag. So the fact that I might have a checked bag on a trip is already a heightened state of fear and uncertainty. Yeah. If when I race to make the plane and I get on the plane and I get that little alert that's like, bloop, your bag's on the plane too. The rest of my flight is relaxation. The rest of my flight is easy to go. Last but not least, I'll give a mail example. That's the only one we haven't done. And in this one, what I'd like to do is instead of giving an example of a company that's currently doing it, let me give an example of why everybody listening or watching today should do it with their customers. Okay? We live in an era where the mailbox, the physical mailbox, the snail mailbox, the OG mailbox, as the young kids call it these days, is less crowded than it's been in decades. It used to be, and Brad, I don't mean to date either of us, but when you and I were coming up, let's be candid. You might go to the mailbox, and there'd be 10, 20, 30 pieces of mail in the mailbox. Now you go to the mailbox, and there's 2 pieces of mail, and they're both invoices, and you're not excited about either of them, right?
True. Yeah.
I ask everyone to think, and I'll play this game with you, Brad, and for those of you listening along at home, go ahead and raise your hands if this applies to you. Raise your hand if, in the last year, you've received a handwritten thank you note from someone that you did business with. Not a family member, but a business you did family with. Brad is not only raising his hand, he's holding it up so I can see it, right? It says, right, you are awesome. It's a physical thank you note. Now, let's play with this. This is unscripted, ladies and gentlemen. This is brand new. And he's got another one that he's holding up. He's got several. Now, here's the questions I'm going to ask Brad. Friends, I promise you this is completely unscripted.
It is.
Brad, did those notes arrive today?
They did not.
They did not. Interesting. Let me ask a couple of questions. How long have you had those thank you notes?
I would say in the region of months.
In the region of months.
Specifically.
Don't know specifically, but it's been more than 30 days, and it's probably been several months. Great. Let me ask you this. Without picking them up and without looking at them, do you remember who they're from?
Yes.
Great. And do you generally remember what they said?
Generally, but not specifically.
Generally, but not specifically. But generally, it was, hey, thanks for your business. It was a thank you, right? So here's the $64,000 question, as the kids say, Brad. Why did he keep the note?
Because if you already do with it.
Okay, fair enough. We'll come to that. But here's the thing. You already read the note.
Yeah.
You know who it's from, but you kept it. Why? Now, Brad gives the answer, well, I don't know what to do with it. Folks, Brad is a wicked smart guy. Brad, do you have a recycling bin in your office?
Yes, I do.
Oh, interesting. So you actually know what you could do with it, but you didn't. You didn't put it in the recycling bin, even though that's actually what you could do, and that's the next logical step for this. But you didn't. And here's my hypothesis as to why you didn't. Because that thank you note is proof that you matter. It's proof that someone you did business with valued you enough to get a card, to handwrite out a letter, to put it in an envelope, to stamp it and address it and send it to you, to have you receive it, to have you open it up, read the letter and go, I matter.
Yeah.
In this day and age, human beings are dying for proof that they matter. And you can make every customer of yours feel like they matter for less than $3 per customer, depending on where in the world you operate, by taking a piece of paper, writing them a thoughtful thank you note. And by the way, the thank you note can be as simple as this. Dear Brad, I love that you're one of our customers. In fact, don't tell any of the others, but you're our favorite. And the reason you're our favorite customer is because we love seeing you every Friday when you come in and get your strawberry sundae. We know it's your thing. We know it's a little treat to end the week. And we so love you continuing to patronize our ice cream shop. Thanks so much. See you next Friday. So it's something that thanks them for their business. It acknowledges something unique about them to say, hey, I didn't send this same letter to everyone. And it futurecast, I'm excited to serve you again. And we write that note and we send it to someone, and it's proof that they matter. Friends, if you did nothing else from our conversation today, other than to pick one customer and to write them a thank you note and put it in the post and mail it to them, you will have started your journey to creating even more remarkable experiences for your customers.
Joey, that's awesome. Thank you. And it matters, and it shows I guess the depth of your heart, which means a lot to me, and I suspect the audience as well. Let's talk about your next book. So first book is Never Lose a Customer Again. Second book, Never Lose an Employee Again. What are the parallels between customer experience and employee experience?
Well, the good news is that customers are humans and employees are humans. So the fundamental philosophy about how humans operate remains the same. In fact, when I was writing Never Lose an Employee Again, the publisher doesn't know this. They might know it now after I share it publicly. One of the first things I did is I took the manuscript for Never Lose a Customer Again. I opened that manuscript. I made a copy of it. I titled it Never Lose an Employee Again. I did a find and replace. Every time I used the word customer, I changed it to employee. And then I printed out the book and I read it to make sure the principles still worked.
Yeah.
And when they did, I started from scratch. Pro tip here for those of you that don't have the desire or the time to go out and buy Never Lose an Employee Again and read it. It's the same 8 phases. It's the same 6 tools, just turned internally on your internal customer experience, which is your employee. How are we thinking about the assess phase? What are we doing in the recruiting stage to give them a preview of what it's going to be like when they actually become a member of our team? I change it from the admit phase, right, to the accept phase. Why? Because we make an offer that hopefully they will accept our offer. All the other phases, same names, by the way. That's the only one that's different. Then they go to the affirm phase, that new hires remorse. Then they go to the activate phase, the first day on the job where we want to energize the relationship. Then the acclimate phase, day 2 on the job, 3, 4, 5, 10, all those days afterwards while they're acclimating to this new role. Then the accomplish phase where they accomplish the goal they had when they originally decided to apply for the job. Then the adopt phase where they become loyal to us and only us and they're not going to respond to the call from the headhunter. Finally, to the advocate phase where whenever we have an open position, they are actively recruiting their best friends, their colleagues, the smartest people they've ever known to come join them at the company they love working at. Same 8 phases. Now here's the question. Why? Because humans are humans are humans.
Yeah.
And the journey's the same.
I love it. Now, people who know me or who are regular listeners of the podcast might be thinking, oh, Brad wrote a book about onboarding and Joey wrote a book about onboarding. How's he going to tackle that?
And for those of you that are just listening, I'm holding up a copy of Onboarded, Brad's book, which I happen to have a copy of on my shelf here at home.
It's just pure coincidence that we released books at a similar time, and having read both of your books, but more specifically, Never Lose an Employee Again, very much my advice to people who've read Onboarded and implement those tools is to read, well, firstly, never lose a customer again, but more importantly, never lose an employee again, because it's not an or, it's an and. We come about it in slightly different ways. There are some things where we land on exactly the same point, which is amazing, but I think it's definitely not an or, it's an and. So my advice is, if you enjoyed Onboarded, that you should definitely read Never Lose an Employee Again. Joey, would you be willing to come back again in a few months, perhaps, and talk to us about that book on the podcast?
Oh, my goodness. I would love to, Brad. Yeah, I've so enjoyed our conversation today. It'd be an honor to come back.
That'd be lovely. So I've made the suggestion that people should read the books. Start, well, obviously, with Never Lose a Customer Again. It is such a fantastic and simple to implement book. Is that where listeners should start, or is there any other advice about that for our listeners?
I think that's a great way to do it. I mean, here's the thing. If you feel daunted by the idea of what is probably a 6 to 8 hour assignment to go read a book, the other option you have is to go to my website, joeycoleman.com. That's Joey, like a baby kangaroo, Coleman, Coleman.com, joeycoleman.com, where you can download the First 100 Days Implementation Kit. What that is a PDF worksheet that outlines the 8 phases we talked about in the conversation here. It's got worksheets that reiterate the 6 tools and how you can apply them to each phases. Those are free. Those are available to you. I'm also happy to share that with you, Brad, so you can make that downloadable in the show notes. But if you want to do that, that's an even easier way to get in without doing the book. I'd love to have you read the book because it allows me to tell some stories and you get into the deeper nuance of the conversation. But I'm just a fan of anybody who decides they want to make a concerted effort to enhance the experience they're delivering for their customers, because it's not only going to make it more fun to come to work for you and more fun to serve your customers for them, it's going to make it more fun for your team as well. So we get an employee experience lift whenever we focus on customer experience. And when we focus on employee experience, we get a customer lift as well. So it's a symbiotic relationship between the two.
Thank you. And thank you for the offer there. We spoke about earlier in the podcast, the book that I'm writing is Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. It's about building a better business rather than focusing on big. For you, how would you define a better business?
You know, it's an interesting question, Brad. And here's the thing. I'm not exactly sure because I haven't read the new book that you're working on writing yet. But I think too many businesses are focused on grow, scale, and it becomes all consuming. I don't know when we decided to demonize the concept of a lifestyle business. I don't know when we decided to say that a small business is lesser than, right? I think a better business is one where the leader, their team, everyone they serve from a customer base, and everyone that they partner with from a vendor or partner base is in alignment about what the goal is. And the goal is to provide value and to make people's lives better today than they were yesterday. It's that simple, and it's that complex.
You might not have read the book, but you're certainly on point. What is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
Oh, my goodness. So many great books in the space. Let me give you 2, if I may, that are both in the customer experience space that folks may not be as familiar with. One is by my good friend Dan Gingiss. It's called The Experience Maker. Great book that's about how do you become the kind of person that makes experiences within your organization. Dan previously worked for Discover. He worked for McDonald's at the global level. So if you're kind of in a bigger company and you're like, Joey, we're B2B, we're doing bigger things, you're going to resonate with a lot of the stories and a lot of the examples in there. The other book is by my good friend Brittany Hodak. Brittany Hodak has a fantastic background, and she's an amazing speaker as well, and just has, built a wonderful career for herself. She's worked with amazing, literal rock stars like Taylor Swift, and her book is called Creating Superfans, and it's all about a methodology for how do you take someone from a first-time purchase to them being a vocal, raving fan about your work. And it's got, again, both of these writers are amazing writers. They're amazing speakers. And if you've enjoyed my book or kind of the way I weave stories and case study examples in, both of them really approach their work from a similar philosophy. So there's a lot of good stories in there too.
Thank you. Some great recommendations there. I haven't heard of either of those.
Oh, perfect. I'm glad.
Joey, what haven't we discussed today that you wanted to cover off?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. What I would offer as a word of caution and also a word of hope is that the idea of focusing on customer experience can be rather daunting. My wife regularly jokes that the show writes itself. And what that means is as we go about our day-to-day interactions as customers, I get fodder for stories and podcast interviews and speeches because there's just so many interactions that are ripe for an opportunity for improvement. And if you're thinking about the type of customer experience you deliver within your organization, you might be saying, oh, but Joey, it's going to be tough to get budget for that, or how are we going to develop a system, or I'm going to spend all this time convincing my colleagues to do it. This sounds daunting and overwhelming. The great thing about customer experience is you get a fresh start every day. You can deliver in any customer interaction that little extra something special, that little bit of personal and emotional connection, that little bit of a magical moment, that little extra moment of care or empathy or consideration or humor or whatever emotion you're feeling like showing right then. You can show that and share that with another human being and ideally make their life better than it was before they met you. So while I get that it's daunting to do this at scale and to do this operationally across an entire enterprise, it can actually be pretty empowering and, dare I say, fun to just adopt this approach to your own life and see how you can play with it. I promise you it'll be worth the effort.
Thank you, Joey, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today with our audience. There are countless nuggets in there, as I anticipated. It means so much to me. Thank you, Joey, for your time today.
Oh, Brad, it is my pleasure. And thanks to everybody who is listening in and watching in. I so appreciate you joining us and staying till the end of the conversation. And I'm looking forward to coming back next time to talk about employee experience already, Brad.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.